And welcome to this wonderful celebration event. We are celebrating Erno Lehtinen's amazing career and having a hopefully nice, stimulating scientific discussions around flexible mathematical thinking and adaptive expertise in mathematical problem solving. And today's speaker will be Lieven Verschaffel. And I'm first going to tell you a little bit about the schedule, how this will go. Welcome, by the way, everyone around the world. I can see that from many different countries, people are there. Our familiar faces from Thailand, I see, and in the States, and in Australia, and in many other places. So welcome, everyone. So the schedule today is that I'm first going to tell you how this is going to be, and then I'm going to introduce our dear guest speaker, Professor Lieven Verschaffel. And then Lieven will give about 45-minute presentation, which will be followed by Erno Lehtinen's and Lieven's nice reflections on the topic of the day. After that, we are going to be wild enough to try a breakout room activity. So we will, I will actually put you into small groups, and there is one stimulating question for us all to talk about together. And after about 10 minutes, we'll come back, and then Jake McMullen will wrap up the whole thing. And so now I would maybe want to point you out who is our dear co-host of the event. He's Jake McMullen. Can you wave your hand? Yes, nice. So that's our Jake, and then there is Erno. There is Erno, and then we have Lieven there. Hello. So the following events will be happening in every second Thursday from now on, and there are fantastic presentations and hopefully exciting discussions coming up. So this is just the starting event of the whole thing. And our plan is to continue this forever and a day, nothing less. So you may never know if you will get some email from us, and we will be inviting you to give a presentation in this series after 20 years. So it's a possible. I want you. Okay. So Lieven will be talking today about his exciting and very groundbreaking research on strategic flexibility in mathematical thinking. And I thought to describe Lieven first in numbers, like you can see from these numbers how outstanding scholar he is. We can only dream about citations more than 5,000 in Scopus or 255 articles, but I think it will be nearly impossible for us else to be able to co-author with 213 separate researchers in the field. So he's really the one that we had to get to start this event, and we are so proud and happy that he wanted to do this celebration with us. He has been our kind of very stimulating, important colleague for more than 20 years when I have been around, and more than who knows how many decades when Erno has been around. So very long time. And amazingly, I noticed two arithmetic facts, and they are the next here. He has been a member of editorial boards as many times as he has been years a professor. But, well, that's something, we can try that. But another thing is quite remarkable, like his age index, which we all know in Scopus, equals to the years that he has been living and doing his science after master's degree in education. That's quite a big number, I must say, like amazing. We can try that. But he's a scholar, but he's also something else. So I'm going to describe Lieven also in words. So the first word is encouraging. He is an amazing mentor and supervisor of a huge number of young scholars and older scholars, and encouragement is his key thing, what he seems to be doing with everyone. He's very loyal to scientific principles and carefulness in science, which we all can enjoy today. He's outstanding scholar, as we heard from the numbers. And I'm going to reveal something more personal about him now next. He is amazing chef. And he's so amazing chef that he has been able to create, I think, at least 5-course menu without any onions, garlic, chives, scallions at his house. So I hope that we will have a nice event today, and I really want to thank you, Lieven, for your accepting our invitation, and I want to thank you, Erno, to accepting our little birthday present as well. And now I'm going to let Lieven take the floor. So now you can start sharing your screen then next, Lieven. This is a good moment to stretch a little bit if you want, because it's going to be a nice sitting here for a while. So a good moment to stretch. I will help you, Lieven. Yes, now it's really good. Do we all agree? Yes, Jacob.
Okay, Mina, is it clear?
I give you all the voice.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for this very, very kind introduction, Mina. Before starting my talk, I would like to express my really sincere thanks to the organizers, Mina and Jake, for the honorable invitation to give a lecture in this Erno Lehtinen online colloquium. Honorable, first of all, because it allows me to publicly express my feelings of admiration for Erno Lehtinen's immense contribution to our research field and our research community of learning and instruction, as well as my feelings of gratitude for the warm friendship that I was privileged to receive from him over the years. And honorable, second, because when looking at the list of presenters to this colloquium, I feel at the same time proud and nervous to be part of such an impressive list. As a topic of my talk, I have chosen adaptive expertise in elementary arithmetic, which is also one of the major topics, by the way, of the research agenda of Erno and his colleagues, Jake and Mina, and their collaborators. And when looking at the program of this colloquium, I also noticed that John Starr will also address this topic in his talk. But knowing John's approach on and work in this topic, I'm confident that our lectures will not overlap, but rather be complementary. My talk will consist of 2 main parts, and I will divide the available time, about 35 to 50 minutes, more or less equally between the 2 parts. A general part and a kind of case that I will elaborate. But before starting, I also would like to emphasize that the work that I will present today is absolutely not the result of an individual effort. To the contrary, it resulted from a really long-standing and intensive collaboration with a set of wonderful colleagues and collaborators. And on the first line, you can see in alphabetic order the colleagues with whom I collaborated mainly on the topic of adaptive expertise in arithmetic in general, whereas in the second row shows you the colleagues, collaborators who are also involved in the specific topic of the case that I will elaborate. So let's start with the first part, the general part, wherein I will present, after a short intro, 3 different views on how we can psychologically conceptualize and educationally address adaptive expertise. And I would like to start this introduction by referring to this book. Surely there were some other older works on arithmetic flexibility from before. For instance, let's think of the Russian psychologist Krutetsky and Western math educators such as Brownell or Scamp. But I think it's fair to say that the topic entered the international research scene in 2003 with the appearance of this book, the preface of which was written by the late Gio Hatano, a really great educational psychologist that our community lost much too early. And in his preface to that book, he distinguished two types of expertise. On the one hand, routine expertise, which he defines as simply being able to complete school math exercises quickly and accurately, without much understanding. Whereas adaptive expertise was defined by Hatano as the ability to apply meaningfully learned procedures in a flexible and creative way. Some comments about this term adaptive expertise first. On the first place, this term adaptive expertise can be applied to various aspects of mathematical expertise, not only to the adaptive or flexible use of strategies for solving mathematical problems, which will be the topic of today's talk, but also to the flexible use of different kinds of representational forms, tables, graphs, formula, and so on, or to being flexible in the creation of mathematical models for solving word problems or world problems. And second, it should be acknowledged that adaptive expertise in elementary arithmetic can also be approached from different perspectives. As I said, as probably will be illustrated by John Starr's lecture later in the colloquium, but as is also evidenced by recent work on adaptive number knowledge by the Turku team. While they acknowledge the value of the focus on flexible strategy choices in arithmetic, which will be the topic of my talk today, they argue at the same time that it may only make up a portion of what entails full adaptivity in arithmetic. And they make a plea for a more general view on adaptive knowledge, adaptive expertise, that includes, I quote, the well-connected knowledge of numerical characteristics and relations as well. And I certainly agree that this is a very important other aspect of adaptive expertise in arithmetic. Let's move to the second section, the main part of this first general part, wherein I will discuss and illustrate three different conceptualizations of strategy adaptivity, namely a task-based, a subject-based, and a context-based conceptualization. And to illustrate the first conceptualization, the task-based one, I would like to start with the following task, which is taken from one of my colleagues, Newell's PhD, a long time ago. The estimation of numerosities of green squares presented in a rectangular grid. And the number of green squares in such a grid can arguably be determined essentially in two different ways. By means of a kind of add strategy, wherein you determine the number of green cells by counting or grouping or another procedure, and a sub strategy, wherein you determine the number of black cells first, and then you subtract this number from the total grid size. And on this slide, you see a set of items and the strategic behavior of three hypothetical pupils. The first pupil always applies the same strategy, the add strategy. Whereas the pupil 2 and 3, they both apply both the add and the sub strategy, but they do it in different ways. And I could ask the question to you, which child demonstrates adaptive expertise according to this first conceptualization? Well, from that task-based perspective, it is clear that pupil 3 is the one who behaves most adaptively, because this pupil systematically chooses for add when there are fewer green than black cells, and for sub, the sub strategy, each time the black cells are in the minority. So according to this first conceptualization, strategy flexibility involves the clever adaptation of one solution strategies to relevant task characteristics. And it is operationalized by analyzing whether a participant uses for a certain set of problems always the most efficient strategy based on a priori rational task analysis by domain experts. And even though this first perspective on strategy adaptivity still is very popular among researchers, math educators, math teachers, and so on, it has been criticized too, for instance, by scholars such as Strelfall, who argue that, and I quote, choice could not be just about the number characteristics of the problem. And this brings me to the second conceptualization. With the rise of cognitive psychology in specific curricular domains such as mathematics, but also physics and other sciences, researchers started to think differently about strategy flexibility. Rather than looking at the task features alone, they started to analyze the role of subject variables too, in ways of attempting to define and operationalize strategy adaptivity. And the most representative scholar of this approach is certainly Bob Siegler, who stated that whether a particular strategy is chosen to solve a particular item by an individual that behaves adaptively, that depends on how accurate and how quick that strategy is for that particular individual in comparison to other concurrent strategies that are available in his or her strategy repertoire. So to know what strategy is the most efficient for that particular individual, it is not simply sufficient to know a person's strategy choices in a traditional testing condition wherein that person can freely choose between all possible strategies. Rather, here we need a more sophisticated method, Bob Siegler argues, the so-called choice-no-choice method. It's a method wherein the same set of items or the same kind of items are administered under two different types of conditions. A choice condition, wherein the participant can use his or her preferential strategy on every item, and two or more no-choice conditions, wherein they are forced to apply a particular strategy given by the experimenter. So, with this method, the researcher essentially gets two kinds of data. From the choice condition, he or she knows each participant's strategy choice on each item. And from the no-choice conditions, we have data about strategy accuracy and strategy speed on each item for each of the no-choice conditions. And information from no-choice conditions are very relevant, as we will see later in the talk. But from the perspective of strategy adaptivity, the major question is now, does the participant in the choice condition, solve each problem by means of the strategy that yields the best performance for him in terms of accuracy and speed, as is evidenced by his data that were obtained in the no-choice conditions. To illustrate this subject-based perspective, I return to Kuhn-Lübbel's numerosity estimation. So, when a person is forced in a no-choice condition to apply the add strategy, let's say on a grid with 7 by 7 grid, and on all 49 items of the grid, then his or her pattern of reaction times will be more or less like the blue line. Items with very few cells will be answered very quickly, whereas items wherein almost all cells are green will take a lot of time to answer. And as shown by the red line, the reverse is true when the same person always has to apply the sub-strategy in the other no-choice condition. In this condition, this person will need a lot of time to respond to the items with few green cells, and he will be very quick when the grid is almost completely filled with green cells. So, what is for this person the best number of green cells to switch from the add to the subtract strategy? If he would be free to choose between both strategies, which is the case in the choice condition, well, it is the point where the two lines cross empirically. From this numerosity on, it becomes more efficient for this person to start using sub instead of add as the strategy. But let's take another hypothetical person. Let's call her Mrs. Green instead of Mr. Red, who is less quick in doing the sub strategy. For instance, because he is much weaker in subtracting a number from 49, and whose reaction time pattern for the sub strategy is therefore much steeper. For this person, for Mrs. Green, the numerosity at which it is most efficient to switch strategies in the choice condition will be more to the right of the horizontal axis, as is indicated in the yellow arrow on the slide. So, from this second perspective on strategy adaptivity, the question, who is adaptive, is answered as follows. It's the person for whom the change point in the choice condition, so the change point of the purple line, is closest to the intersection of the blue and the red line, which reflect the reaction time data from the two no-choice conditions. Unfortunately, time does not allow me to elaborate on a study wherein we showed empirically that this difference between the observed and the optimal change point, in other words, the length of the yellow bidirectional arrow, decreased with the age of the participants together with their improved task performance. Context-related conceptualization of strategy adaptivity. In line with the rise of insights from sociocultural and socio-cognitive perspectives in developmental and educational psychology in the 90s at a more general level, we witnessed in the research on strategy adaptivity the rise of a new conceptualization or a refinement of the conceptualization, wherein the adaptive expert's decision process becomes even more complex or more subtle, as it involves not only elements of the task and the subject, but also the socio-cultural context wherein the task and the subject are situated. For instance, what aspects of their strategy behavior, besides taking into account accuracy and speed, are most valued in the classroom or the testing context? Aspects of simplicity, elegance, formality, originality, academic prestige, and so on. I give some examples. In a study by another colleague of mine, high-achieving third graders in mental arithmetic did not apply their cognitively most efficient strategy because they thought that the standard solution method, being the one that was taught in the math class, would be valued more by the researcher as well as it would be done by the teacher. In another study by Wim van Doren, pre-service secondary school teachers solved arithmetic word problems via an unnecessary complex algebraic solution method because they considered the algebraic method to be mathematically more sophisticated, to have more academic prestige. And finally, according to a story that was told to me by a remedial teacher in Germany some years ago at the end of a talk, a first grader continued to apply his primitive counting all strategy to do his simple addition and subtractions because this was the only way he could continue to his weekly visits to the remedial teacher with whom the poor boy had fallen in love. As you can imagine from these three illustrative cases, bringing in that socio-cultural perspective creates extra theoretical and methodological complications. For instance, getting a good view on these contextual factors and how they are perceived and considered by the individuals requires appropriate techniques such as in-depth interviews with pupils and teachers or classroom observations. Let's now quickly move to some educational considerations, which I will discuss around 4 simple questions. Questions for which I will always give 2 opposite answers, as they can be found in the research literature. First of all, there is the why question. Why to strive for adaptive expertise in elementary arithmetic? According to researchers and practitioners who adhere to the first position, we do so because it would result in increased computational performance. Whereas adherents of the second position plea for including it in the curriculum primarily because it helps children to develop valuable general goals of mathematics education, such as deep understanding of mathematical principles, critical and strategic thinking, learning to communicate in mathematics, and so on. And some adherents of that second position would be people like Ellen Schoenfeld in the US, the members of the Freudenthal Institute in the Netherlands, and Erich Mittmann and his colleagues from Dortmund in Germany. The second dilemma, the educational dilemma, when to strive for it. There is, on the one hand, the position that one better teaches first for routine expertise, and only afterwards, when this has been accomplished, one changes the aims and pedagogy in the direction of adaptive expertise. Whereas in the second position, the opposite position, it is argued that there is a great danger in teaching and practicing routine expertise first, before starting to work at adaptive expertise, because once established, dispositions are hard to change. And this second position is nicely illustrated by this quote from the famous John Bransford from the US, wherein he argues that, I quote, adaptive expertise involves habits of mind, attitudes, and ways of thinking and organizing one's knowledge that are different, fundamentally different from routine expertise, and that take time to develop. And I would add, and that are moreover hard to develop starting from routine expertise. There is a third educational dilemma. For whom to strive for it? And again, there are two positions. The first position states that because ultimately only the more mathematically minded children will be capable of learning how to make good choices, flexibility should be abandoned as an objective for the average and the below average children. Whereas in the second position, every child has the right to get instruction that aims for understanding and flexibility, including the mathematically weaker and even weakest ones. An illustrative for that latter position is, for instance, the Dutch math educator Maria van den Heuvel, who, based on her own experiences as a special math education teacher and as a researcher in this domain, has argued very heavily against the first traditionalist position and in favor of the other one. But also, and even in a more principled way, by another scholar from the US, Brian Greer, who argued that it may even be regarded as an ethical question whether it is equitable to expose children of average and low ability to a math education that is intellectually less stimulating. And there is the fourth and last educational dilemma. How to strive for it? Some traditionalists, scholars as well as practitioners, they think that adaptive expertise in elementary arithmetic should be aimed at by the provision of and the intensive training in a specific, I would say, quasi-algorithmic decision procedure, as is illustrated on the next slide. In this figure, coming from a Flemish textbook, where children are given a strict algorithm that tells them what specific solution strategy should be used for each distinguished type of single-digit addition problem. And children are drilled into the use of this algorithm to behave adaptively. Whereas in the second position, we strive for adaptive expertise by creating a classroom practice and culture that aims at ownership of one's strategy choices, at learning to communicate and argue about the whens and the whys of certain strategies. And as an illustration of that opposite approach, I show here a page from a textbook, mathematical textbook for elementary school children, Mate 2000, wherein you see how a variety of strategies is given to the children, and children are asked questions like, how does each child solve the problem? Which strategy would you prefer for a certain problem? And also the question, why? So I have come at the end of the first general part of my talk, and I will now move to the elaboration of a kind of case, the case of subtraction by addition. And I will report briefly on a study wherein a choice-no choice study with upper elementary school children, or medium and upper elementary school children, about the use of this particular strategy, subtraction by addition. It's a study that fits into the PhD project of one of our collaborators, Stijn van der Ouwera. When multi-digit symbolic subtractions have to be solved by mental arithmetic, it can be done essentially in two different ways. Either by means of a direct subtraction strategy, whereby the smaller number is directly subtracted from the larger one, or by means of a subtraction by addition strategy, whereby the solver determines the outcome by adding on from the smaller number to the larger one. That is a central distinction that we will refer to in this study. I have to give you some background information first. Current educational practice, certainly Flanders, is completely direct subtraction based. And I elaborate this a bit on this slide, giving some essentials about current educational practice in Flanders. In grade 2, we pay a lot of attention to two-digit mental subtraction up to 100. And then in grade 3, this is elaborated up to 1000. And in grade 3, we also introduce the written subtraction algorithm. But it is important to point out that both the approach to mental subtraction and the approach to the algorithm, as illustrated on the right side of this slide, are both direct subtraction based. You always subtract the smaller number from the larger one. In some classes in Flanders, there is a little bit of attention to clever strategies besides this mainstream strategy, but not on subtraction by addition. But this is in contrast with texts of math educators who consider the use of subtraction by addition as a typical case of adaptive expertise. The idea being that subtraction by addition is particularly suited for subtractions with small and certainly very small differences between the two numbers, as illustrated by these two subtractions. There is already some empirical evidence available on the use of subtraction by addition. And up to recently, this evidence was very conflicting. There were studies with children wherein we applied the technique of individual interviews, which showed little of no evidence of the use of subtraction by addition by the children. And on the other hand, there were some reaction time studies that gave us a glimpse of the use of this strategy. But more recently, there was a study wherein we applied the choice-no-choice method on this problematique. And in the first study, we did that with young adults. And in that study, we found impressively strong evidence for the occurrence, for the frequency, for the efficiency, and for the flexible use of subtraction by addition. And so the question was, what about children? If we investigate them using also this choice-no-choice methodology. The study that I will present is at the moment not the only one that has been done by using subtraction by addition. There are some other studies, also very recent studies that did it, but time does not allow me to discuss the similarities and differences between these different studies. Our participants were 150 children divided into 3 age groups and in 4 general mathematical achievement levels. And there was also a more or less equal distribution of boys and girls. Well, all these children received 3 parallel series of 13 multi-digit subtractions in the number domain up to 1000. 10 of which were experimental items, 5 small difference subtractions with a small difference between the two given numbers, and 5 large difference subtractions with a big difference between the two given numbers. And there were also some buffer items with medium difference subtractions, which were not involved in our analysis. And the children received these 3 parallel series of subtractions in 3 different conditions. 1 choice condition, wherein they could choose between the 2 strategies, and 2 no choice conditions. 1 wherein they were forced to apply direct subtraction, and another one wherein they had to use subtraction by addition. Here are some elements of the procedure. We always start with the choice condition. There were some balancing procedures for items and for other conditions, and we presented all the items on a laptop computer with the instruction to behave as accurately and as fast as possible. Because our strategy, subtraction by addition, was typically not taught in classrooms, we had, of course, to give a brief explanation of the 2 strategies and to work with some practice trials at the beginning of each condition. And we used the following representation in the choice condition to help children differentiate between the 2 possible strategies. And for instance, in the no choice conditions, we worked with this representation for the no choice direct subtraction condition, and with this representation for the no choice subtraction by addition condition. And so, using this method, we had data for every item on the accuracy, correct or wrong, on the speed in seconds, and in the choice condition, we also knew what strategy the children had used, either direct subtraction or subtraction by addition. Let me quickly move to the results. Most children solved at least 1 subtraction in the choice condition by means of the untaught subtraction by addition strategy. 70% of the cases. In 60%, they used at least once direct subtraction and subtraction by addition, and in 15% of the cases, they only used subtraction by addition on all items of the choice condition. We also found that in 25% of the cases, the children solved all the items by means of the taught direct subtraction strategy. And interestingly, there were no significant associations with grade or with achievement level. With respect to frequency, in the choice condition, the explicitly and the systematically taught and practiced direct subtraction strategy was applied on 60% of the items of the choice condition, whereas the untaught subtraction by addition strategy was used in the choice condition in about 40% of the cases. Again, no association neither with age nor with math achievement. Let's now look at the efficiency data which came from the no choice condition. So in this table you see how accurate and how quick children were when they were forced to apply direct subtraction and when they were forced to apply subtraction by addition in the 2 no choice conditions. And we show these data for the total of the 10 experimental items, as well as for the 2 types of items, the small difference and the large different items. And what do we see? When children are forced to apply a particular strategy in the no choice conditions, subtraction by addition, the untaught strategy, was more accurate than direct subtraction. And likewise, when comparing reaction times in the 2 no choice conditions, subtraction by addition also turned to be quicker than direct subtraction. And when we look at the results for the 2 problem types, it becomes clear that the overall pattern is, as one would expect, completely caused by the small difference items. Here, the computational advantage, both in terms of accuracy and speed, is remarkable. Whereas for the large different items, accuracy and speed are almost exactly the same in the two conditions. But please allow me to draw your attention to this again remarkable finding. So even for those items for which one would rationally expect the direct subtraction strategy to be most efficient, the untaught subtraction by addition strategy is still equally accurate and equally quick. On this slide, you see the association for the efficiency data with grade and math achievement level. And although there were some significant interactions, which I will not discuss due to time reasons, the most important thing is that the general pattern that was shown on the previous table were found again in all 3 age groups and in all 4 math achievement levels. Let me now move to the 4th strategy parameter, which is, given the content of my talk, maybe the most important one, adaptivity. And I will make a distinction between task-based adaptivity and subject-based adaptivity. The current study doesn't cover the context-based conception of adaptivity. And I will, in the task-based adaptivity, make a distinction between a general measure and an individual one. And for the subject-based adaptivity, I will discuss results relevant for accuracy and speed. As explained in the first general part of my talk, task-based adaptivity would imply that the participants make strategy decisions based on relevant task features. And in line with our expectation, when children are free to choose between both strategies, they choose subtraction by addition much more frequently when confronted with the small different items than when a large different item is given. So this is a strong indication of task-based adaptivity at the general, at the group level. And again, there was no interaction with age, but for achievement level here, we found that only one group did not show this task-based adaptivity, namely the lowest achievers. We also worked with an individual measure of task-based adaptivity, as we performed a latent class analysis on the 10 strategy choices in the choice condition. And based on the theoretical arguments and on the comparison of the critical statistics for the different models, a model with 3 classes was selected. And on the next figure, you see the estimated probability to use subtraction by addition on the 10 items from the choice condition for these 3 classes. The children in the first class, the blue line, which we call the subtraction by addition class, and which involved 20% of our participants, had a very high likelihood of using subtraction by addition on all items in the choice condition. The children in the second class, the orange one, which we call the adaptive class, and which covered 46% of our participants, were likely to almost never use subtraction by addition on large different items, and to almost always use it on the small different items. And the children in class 3, the gray line, which we call the always direct subtraction class, and covers about 1/3 of the children, they were most likely to never use subtraction by addition and always use direct subtraction throughout all 10 items. Interestingly, the strategy profiles were not related to grade or to overall math achievement level, even though there were there was a kind of tendency that the proportion of adaptive children was the highest among the high-achieving children. I will skip this slide because of time reasons, and I would like to say a few words about subject-based adaptivity. In line with Ziegler and associates, in line with what they propose as a good measure for subject-based adaptivity, we also analyzed if the children who were more accurate in the subtraction by addition condition compared to the direct subtraction condition, if they were also the ones who more frequently applied subtraction by addition to solve the subtractions in the choice condition, which is a clear indication of subject-based adaptivity. And this was actually the case, and we found the same not only for accuracy, but also for speed. So this result provides evidence that the children fitted their strategy choices to individual strategy characteristics, both with respect to accuracy and speed. And again, we found little or no interactions with age and math achievement, except that for accuracy, only the oldest children, the 6th graders, fitted their strategy choices to individual strategy accuracy. I come to the conclusion. First, our study yielded additional evidence for the remarkably frequent, efficient, and flexible use of the untaught indirect addition strategy, even in younger and mathematically weaker children. So it's a strong demonstration of the constructive nature of learning as it happens in an educational setting that does not teach, even doesn't implicitly favor its use, the use of this strategy. Second, I think at a general level, I think our study provides additional support for the analytic strength, the analytic power of the theoretical framework of strategy choice and strategy change by Ziegler and his associates. But I explained it already in the beginning of my talk. This is not the only and maybe not the most important way to conceptualize and operationalize adaptive expertise. Certainly, it can and should be complemented with other perspectives. Even though we have intensively studied over the last decade this strategy, still we struggle with a large number of questions of a developmental, individual, and educational psychological nature. Let me briefly point to some of these questions. I will not elaborate them due to time reasons. From a developmental perspective, we still are confronted with the question, when and how does subtraction by addition originate? With respect to the when question, we now have data with 4th graders, but the question is, what about still younger children? In the meantime, we have already collected data of 3rd graders, which are already much less favorable for subtraction by addition. And probably if we go even younger, the computational superiority and the preference of this strategy will further decrease. But with respect to the how question, which is even more difficult to answer, I think, the question is, how exactly does this strategy pops up in someone's strategy repertoire for doing multi-digit symbolic subtraction? I think that the most promising route will be to look for possible transfer of subtraction by addition from other subdomains in and out of the school context. And on this slide, I will not elaborate on it for time reasons. I give you a few examples of other domains of in and out of school arithmetic, where there is also evidence of the distinction between subtraction by addition and direct subtraction. It applies to the domain of single-digit subtraction by means of counting in very young children, where we see that some children solve sums like 9 minus 7 by means of a counting up instead of a counting down strategy. And in the literature on word problems, it's a very well documented fact that subtraction problems like this problem, the change 3 problem, Pete has 4 apples, he got some more, now he has 12. How many apples did he get from N? Is solved by many children by means of material, verbal, or mental subtraction by addition based strategies. And in an out-of-school context, the older people among us will remember that when we went to a grocery shop, before the omnipresence of electronic cashiers, the shopkeeper would use an addition-based strategy to find out how much money he or she would have to return when you pay, for instance, something that you buy for 356 Belgian francs, how much you would get back, he should give back if the customer gives a billet of 500 Belgian francs. With respect to individual psychological issues, we need more information about the role of domain general and domain specific variables in children's use of subtraction by addition. Domain general factors, we can think of executive functions like working memory, cognitive inhibition, cognitive flexibility. It's a domain on which our PhD student Stijn is working very hard at the moment. But we can also think on domain general, domain specific factors. Based on the literature in math education, it seems to us that it would be very interesting to look at learners' conceptual knowledge of mathematical operations and their interrelations, such as the addition-subtraction complementarity principle, or what kind of intuitive models the child has about subtraction. Does he or she only see subtraction as take away, or does he or she also has the meaning of subtraction in terms of a difference between two distinct numbers? That kind of conceptual knowledge is, in our view, hypothetically closely related to whether a child will discover the subtraction by addition strategy and whether he or she will apply it in a frequent and efficient way. And finally, there is the educational psychological issue. As I did at the end of the first general part of my talk, we can ask questions like why, when, for whom, and how to teach for subtraction by addition. Notwithstanding my strong plea for more intervention research on the topic, I think we really need more intervention research on this topic. There is only little research at the moment. I think that we should invest much time and energy in intervention research. But still, it is my personal conviction that the question of the place of subtraction by addition in early arithmetic and the 4 questions more specifically will never be truly solved on empirical grounds alone. The answer to this question will always depend, in my view, on the perspective, the view that one has on what elementary mathematics education is all about. So it's not it's not mere an empirical issue, but also values about education, about childhood, about society are at stake. And I think this is a nice sentence to end my talk. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lieven. And now we are ready to move to the next session. I think we can clap, everyone. Now the whole globe is clapping their hands. Now the next thing is we will give the floor now to Erno and Lieven. And Erno, what are your thoughts on the topic? Like now this.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much, Lieven, for your impressive talk. And of course, I also want to make use of this situation to thank Mina and Jake and the whole team for organizing this wonderful lecture series. But and I would like to thank you, Lieven, not only for your talk, but also for the decades collaboration and friendship. It has been very important for me, and I very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
So if I think now on the whole, this study program you described, because I know that there's a huge number of details which you didn't have time to describe in this 145 minutes presentation. So for me, it's a kind of very important example, because one serious problem I see in educational research in general is the kind of fragmented nature of research. So that there are individual studies about that, and then a new study about that, and so on. As that's very interesting, may have very interesting results. But the big problem is that there's very, in general, there's very little accumulation of convinced scientific knowledge. And in my opinion, this work what you have done during more than 10 years now in Leuven about these issues is an example of other type of research where you take some important topics and then make a long series of well-defined studies where you make small variations and repeat some aspects of the earlier studies, make some changes, and what it produces is a kind of much more convinced and in a very robust understanding of this phenomena. And this is something I very much value, and I think that we should have much more this type of research in not only in mathematics education, but in educational sciences in general, so that we have a stronger basis for accumulating our scientific understanding. So, of course, even in this kind of project, there are still many aspects which has not been explained, and you shortly referred to the cultural differences in this talk, and it is clear that certain strategies are emphasized in one culture and maybe another strategy in other culture. But do you think that there are more general cultural differences, so that this kind of flexibility as such is more valued in other cultures, and then more kind of routine type approaches are more valued in other educational cultures?
Thank you, Erno. I will maybe start by responding to the direct question that you asked at the end of the talk. I certainly think that there are differences between countries, because, as I said, the case of subtraction by addition is only a case for a more general theme. How to what extent do you value flexibility and adaptivity in arithmetic? And I briefly referred to the math wars that many countries have encountered. You could say that over the last maybe 20-25 years, in many countries like the US, the Netherlands, the UK, Australia, we have had a kind of mad war between what we call the traditionalists or the mechanists and the people who adhere more constructivist or authentic or realistic mathematics education. And you could almost say that the view on the four educational questions that I raised at the end of the general part, the why, the for whom, the when to teach, and how to teach, is the opposite views. Yeah, this is the one opponent is always the traditionalist, and the opponent is the extreme realist or the extreme realist or constructivist educator or scientist. And countries differ in whether or not their elementary school mathematics educational culture and practice is dominated by a more traditionalist or a more realist perspective. Just to take the case of Flanders and the Netherlands, for instance, as you also know, and maybe several people in the audience as well, the Netherlands is a prototypical country wherein the realistic view, the constructive view on mathematics education, due to the important role of the Freudenthal Institute, plays at the national level. Whereas in Flanders, we have been much more prudent, much more reluctant in picking up these ideas, these constructivist and realistic ideas on elementary school mathematics. And that explains, for instance, why it's really true that when we observe classes, when we ask teachers, when we look at textbooks in Flanders, there is no reference to this subtraction by addition strategy. That is why we think it is such a striking case. Instruction, yeah, nothing is being taught about it, nothing is being said about it. And you see suddenly that the majority of the children use it in their have it in their repertoire, use it frequently, are even more efficient with it, and develop flexibility. That's why I emphasize so much the constructive nature of what is happening there, because there is no explicit teaching, there is no support from the textbook, the classroom culture and practice. And I think indeed you can categorize countries on a kind of, not in a dichotomy, but on a kind of continuum, being more traditionalist and more realist. And that will correlate with the importance that is given to flexibility.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Yes, I agree that that was an impressive finding, that children use these strategies which have never taught in at school, and so for many children, and even children who are not extremely or high level achievement in mathematics. So that is important. So my second comment is somehow related to that, and even though now you have been dealing with relatively specific questions in this long tradition, but I do believe, and I know that you think in the similar way, that it is connected to more general issues on mathematics, so that it's dealing it is clearly dealing with the idea what mathematics is, that the nature, the belief we have about the nature of mathematics, and this traditionalist view can be seen as a way to teach kind of linear nature of arithmetic, so that you have first number, then operation, then the second number, then a kind of standard procedure, and then you get an answer. But if students use in subtraction tasks addition strategies, then they have to think differently. Do you agree that they have to have a kind of more systemic thinking about the relations between numbers?
Yes, I fully agree, and I think that there, because I feel that you are looking at, let's say, the link between the approach that you are following that is focusing,
yes,
and the approach that is focusing more on operations and strategies to do operations. And I think that you rightly point that they are not, certainly not opposite, and even different, totally different approaches. There is a lot of communality in that. And I also think that I pointed already a bit to that link between the two by referring, in my view, to the point of the relationship between procedural and conceptual knowledge. I really think that because we, with that choice, no choice paradigm, we are following in direction of Ziegler and this approach, which pays a lot of attention to the procedural knowledge, development of the procedures, but doesn't pay that much attention to the underlying, what are the underlying concepts that you to understand and master in order to be able to develop, to discover and develop that strategy. And I really think I regret that I couldn't pay more attention to it, but one of the latest slides referred to this conceptual knowledge. And this is indeed a problem with the subtraction by addition strategy. When children have only a very operational, sequential view on doing subtractions, it's very, very difficult for them to apply the subtraction by addition strategy, because they have the take away notion. And indeed fits with that sequential way of seeing the first number, then you subtract another one, and then you have an outcome. But have the mathematically much more promising conception of subtraction as a difference between two numbers.
Yes, yes.
It's a so much more powerful and more promising and more flexible concept of the subtraction, which opens much more possibilities for deeper understanding and more flexible knowledge. And I think also that concept of seeing the difference between numbers represents a very nice relation between the more number-based view and the more operation.
Yes.
That we
Sure.
hear.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that then this is a kind of generic idea to see the difference between numbers and the relationship between numbers. It's then, there's not yet evidence about that. Maybe you already have, but I would think that this generic idea is very valuable then when children then students are learning mathematics, if they get used to think about mathematics in this way.
Yeah, and I fully agree that with our kindergarten and elementary school math education, we should look for those powerful, important, generic ideas. I can already announce that I'm Doc Clemens and colleagues are also giving a presentation. I'm sure that they talk a lot about those powerful, generic ideas that should be at the heart of an innovative approach to early school mathematics and beginning elementary school mathematics.
Yes. And then
thank you. And now it would be the time, sorry Erno, time to go to the break rooms to continue the discussion. I think we all feel like starting to talk with each other. So you never know with whom you will end up in the same room. So this is kind of exciting. So the breakout room question for us will be
it's in the chat.
It's in the chat and it's also on your screen. Why and to whom should we teach flexible mathematical thinking? So this is your discussion topic. Of course, you can, if you see your wonderful, longly missed colleague, feel free to say hi as well. So we will be doing this about less than about 7 minutes now, and then I'll ask you come back, and then Jake will summarize the whole session with the Lieven's part, Erno's part, and the discussion part, and the small group event.
Yeah, generally we wanted to thank you all for coming. I guess the time is running short, so I don't have any major words to say in conclusion. I think that I was really pleased with the discussion turning towards the educational issues that Erno and Lieven brought up. So we wanted to just mainly also remind you and point out to you that we will be carrying out these symposium or what's the online lectures every 2 weeks at this time at 2 p.m. Finnish time, except on a couple dates in November and December. And we hope to continue these then afterwards as well, and so keep an eye out for that in the various places that you've found out information on that. And most of all, we want to thank Lieven for joining us. Thank you for sharing his experiences and his knowledge about this topic, and giving us a really excellent overview on these issues related to adaptive expertise in mathematics. Thank you, Erno, for engaging in a fruitful discussion, and hopefully all of you also could find some time to have interesting discussions in the breakout rooms. Please contact us via email. You can find the email on the website if you have any feedback for us on ways we could make these sessions more interesting or less interesting, or anything you want to provide for us. We're happy to hear it. This is the first one, and we definitely want to kind of find new ways to interact with each other when we can't meet in person. So yeah, and with that, I'll thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieven. Thank you, Minna. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in 2 weeks, I hope.